All right, hi, welcome y'all to the workshop Wednesday. Today, my name is Christina.
And my name is Carl.
And today we are going to talk about knots and tarps. So some things that we're going to go over today. We'll introduce you all to why knots and tarps are helpful and important when doing outdoor activities. We're going to go over a little bit of leave no trace. We're going to go through knots and hitches and the difference between the two. And then we're also going to talk about tarps, like different types of tarps and things to know about selecting your tarps, and the different types of structures you can use. And then y'all are going to get to watch a little video of us setting up a tarp. So why knots and tarps? Well, the main thing is they'll keep you cool and dry. Here in Oregon, we get lots of different elements, and it helps you to just be more versatile with your outdoor experience. Some people will sleep in a tarp and then you don't have to carry a tent. It's often a lot lighter. On hot days, it's nice to use it as a shade structure. You can see this person here has a great tarp setup over their tent and over their eating area. So if it gets rainy, all your stuff stays dry and you do too.
Awesome. So we like to do a little PSA about leave no trace. It's a really important thing when you're going into outdoors to understand what leave no trace is and kind of how to incorporate it into your activities when you're out there. And so there's 7 main steps to leave no trace. First, you want to plan ahead and be prepared. Know where you're going, know what resources are available there. If they have bathrooms, if they don't, if you need to bring a spade or something, a trowel or something like that. Number 2 is travel and camp on durable surfaces. And so this is kind of, something to very much consider if you're going to be building tarp structures, like where can I build them? What sort of surfaces are on there? Am I going to be underneath them? Is it my stuff that's going to be underneath them? And how's that going to impact the soil and the things around there? Dispose of waste properly. So if you're bringing your own things or if you're going to the bathroom, make sure you dispose of it the way that you're supposed to when you're there. Leave what you find. So take some pictures, but make sure you leave the rocks and the stones and the, animals and whatnot that's out there. Minimize campfire impacts. So only make campfires if you're allowed to. I mean, when you do, minimize it. Don't make a huge bonfire. Respect the wildlife. Make sure you keep your distance. Don't feed wildlife while you're out there. And then finally, number 7, be considerate of other visitors. And so just, kind of being friendly and courteous, and especially now during COVID, if you wear your masks as you're going by people is a good thing to do, and maybe even not, just generally when you're out there. All right, and so that's kind of the general leave no trace. And again, it's good to try to incorporate this and think about this maybe when you're out there practicing building your tarp structures or out there camping and building tarp structures. How do you minimize your impact on the environment? That's kind of the general ethos of leave no trace. And so now we're moving into kind of the meat of it. And so when you're going to be making tarp structures, and you're going to need to know how to tie knots and also hitches. And so there's a difference between those two things. And we just wanted to highlight that here quickly. So a knot basically allows you to join 2 pieces of rope or one end of the rope to another piece of that same rope. And a hitch allows you to tie it to an object or a structure. And so if you're tying something to a tree, then it's likely going to be the hitch. And a knot, again, will just be to a piece of rope. And so before we kind of get into actually how you do some of the knots and the hitches that you're going to be needing to know to make tarp structures, I just want to introduce y'all to some terminology that's kind of important. So when you're watching us and you listen to us kind of explain how to tie this knot or this hitch, you know what we're talking about. And I think knots and hitches are generally kind of hard to learn, especially without some guidance there. And so knowing this terminology will really help you be able to follow along the videos easily. And so here I lay out kind of in this picture, the working end is going to be the end that you're kind of actively using. And I'm going to remove my camera quick and kind of show you this as well. And we'll see how this turns out. in the actual recording video. So here we have a piece of rope, paracord, and so over here is kind of, over on this side is what would be known as the standing end, and over here is the working end. And so with this end, I can make it, you know, start to move it and start to tie things around each other. And so when you have this working end, I'm going to fold it back and then turn it and, you know, kind of clamp the working and the standing end together to make a bite. And this is a bite right here. And if I take that working end and fold it over the standing end, now I have a loop, and this is a loop. And so those are kind of just some of the basic terminologies that are good to know when you're starting to tie knots and hitches. All right, so let's go to the next slide. And now, okay, so now if you guys want to, this might be a good place to grab some paracord or some rope that you have lying around, pause the video if you need to go look for it, and come back, and you can kind of pause the video as we go through this process, and you can practice tying these as well. All right, so we're gonna start out super basic. And here on the presentation, you can kind of see very clearly how you actually would tie an overhand knot. And I think many of you probably already know how to do this, but this is kind of one of the very basic and fundamental knots, and it's good to know. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take, again, that working end, and you're going to wrap it around until it's a loop. And so you're over the standing end, and again, grab that working end, and you're going to pull it through this loop now. And now you can pull both the working and the standing end together, and you'll have an overhand knot. So if you guys want, you know, through that process, if that was a little fast for you, you can definitely go back and pause and kind of start the video and stop and pause and stop and pause. So it's kind of easier to follow along. All right. So now, let's do a quick slip knot. And so slip knot is going to be essential for one of the hitches we're doing later. And so here in the presentation on the screen, we have an image of kind of a bite. And then they take, again, that working end, bring it forward towards the head of the bite again, and then they wrap it over that bite. And then once it's over, sorry, sometimes it's hard to work with this on here. We're going to take this working end and wrap it over the bite, and then behind the bite and through the loop, the secondary loop that you created. And so now if you want to, they, in the picture here, they wrap around these two pieces. Oh man, this is really hard to see, isn't it? These two pieces right here multiple times, this one. So you can wrap it around that multiple times if you want, or you can then again just pull that piece through like that, the working end through, and it'll cinch down, and you'll have this little knot right here, and now you have a slip knot. And so a slip knot is basically allows you to then, after you have the knot in place, if you pull the working end and the standing end apart, that knot will come undone automatically. But if you grab onto the working and the standing end and pull on the loop that you've created, it doesn't come undone. And so you have this nice little loop that if you pull on, it won't come undone. And now I'm going to pull on the standing and the working end, and there you go. There's no knot anymore. So again, that was fast, and it's becoming apparent to me that it's difficult to maybe see what I'm doing with my hands in the way. But hopefully with the combination of the picture and that demonstration, you can learn how to do that slip knot, which will be essential again for the future hitches that we're going to be doing. Okay, and now we're on to the hitches. Or no, the bowline, sorry. So the bowline is one more knot that is essential, and we're going to be using when we're making these tarp structures. And so what you're going to have here is your standing and your working end. I'm going to rotate it a little bit differently this time. Let's see how that works. So my working end is up down here, and then my standing end is up this way. And you're going to put a loop kind of near the standing end of it. And so then you have the standing end here, up here. And you're going to take that working end and you're going to pass it through your loop. So you're going to pass from underneath up through your loop. See if I can pause and let you see kind of that quickly. And so yeah, the working end comes up through right here. And then I'm going to pass it around the standing end and back through that same loop. So now, see if I can get this. Now it's underneath that standing end. And now I'm going to take that working end again and pass it through this loop right here. And now with that, I can pull hold on to the standing end and the working end and pull again. And there is your Builtin knot. And you have this nice little loop here and you can pull on it really nice and tight and it's not coming undone. And the nice thing about the Builtin is it's super easy to untie. And so if you add a lot of tension, which is what we're going to end up doing with this, it's still then easy to quickly undo. And you don't need, a knife or scissors to cut the rope apart to untie it. Hopefully that time I paused a little bit more and demonstrated where the working and the standing end were going. Yeah, so again, kind of follow along and watch the video. And then here's a nice diagram that you can also follow along and create your Builtin knot. And so now we're going to go on to hitches.
Great, so yeah, we'll start with the trucker's hitch. This is the one that you'd use to set up your ridge line. You could also use it for the corners of your tarp, but it puts a lot of tension on things. So it might, the risk in using it on the corners is you might pull or break your tarp, but you do want a lot of tension when you're setting up your ridge line. So to start your trucker's hitch, what you're gonna do is basically, it's kind of similar to a slip knot. You'll take and make a bite, give it a twist, and then a couple more twists. And then you pull through the loop that you made to get another bite from under there. So this is probably hard to see. So yeah, a few more twists. Pull through here and pull it. And you have kind of, it's again very similar to a slip knot here. But with this, what makes it a hitch is you would then, so pretend it was like around a tree. I'd have my water bottle as the tree here. I could go through it. And then, one sec here. And then I could pull back on it to create tension in my ridge line here. But actually it would be the other way. The one thing to be mindful of is like using the right side. So actually, yeah, this one would be good. So then I can pull back and this would create tension on my ridge line. Yeah, it's probably easier to follow the diagram, but you can try to work along with us that way. And so in the second slide, it kind of shows what you do to put it through the loop and pull it back. So it's the same steps, again, twisting it a few times around, creating the loop through, that's kind of like a slip knot, then putting the other end through the one thing and pulling it back that way to create tension. And again, with this one, you can just, after you've pulled it out of the loop, you can pull it and it's done. So the taut line hitch is another one we'll be doing. I'm gonna tie this to my water bottle as if it's around a tree here. And unfortunately the rope is the same color as my walls. So the taut line, what you do is you make a loop across, and the phrase I use to remember this is 3 to the tree and 1 to me. So if the water bottle was a tree, I give myself enough slack and go 3 times around the one side. Make sure it's nice and tight. There's the 3. And then 1 to me, so you go on the other side, wrap 1 around the rope 1 time, and then You can pull it tight and clean it up. And again, the neat thing about this is with this cord here, you can use this. This will tighten it and you can slide it back this way and it'll pull, but it will still like hold the tension if you pull really hard. So it's not going to slip unless you're like giving it the slack it needs to slide along the rope. And then the next one is a clove hitch. So this would be helpful if you were like if you didn't want to put your rope through the girth on your tarp. One thing you could do is you could like find a pine cone and put it in your tarp, and then you'd make a clove hitch to go around it. So it's just like an easy knot to undo that can hold on to something tightly. The way I'm going to show you is you'd have the rope and you make one loop. So the back side of this one piece is going towards me. And then I'm going to make another loop where the other side is going the other way. And then they cross over and it goes like this. And so the other image on here is showing you how you could do it to an attached bar or something like that. It's making a similar kind of loop. But this is very strong and I could put it over anything and it'll hold it tight. And then finally we have the girth hitch. So this we mentioned in our video later. It's mostly what I use to like get P cords together. So let me get my other rope. So often on my paracord, I'm gonna keep a little like overhand knot on the end of it so that I can extend them if I need to. And the way I would do this, which is the girth hitch, and you've probably used it in other ways, is sticking one through the other and passing my loop through there. So it's not even a knot, but it's gonna hold the tension and keep these two ropes attached together really well without having to undo anything later. So it makes it easy.
Awesome. So next we're going to talk about the tarp. So we kind of have an idea of what's going on with the knots and the hitches and the kind of the basic ones that we're going to be using to make our tarp structures. And so now we need to know like what kind of tarps can we use, what should we be using, and like how do we differentiate that kind of stuff. And so here's a quick overview of the things we're going to go over with that. And so it's important to kind of consider what material is my tarp, you know, and how durable is it. And so the density and thickness has to do with that a lot. The construction, so what types of features does it have in it that allow me to, you know, attach a rope to it or make it durable or not durable. The size of the tarp, and you know, whether you're going to have 1 or 20 people under that tarp will make a big difference. And then the different configurations. And so, you know, I think the basic configuration is the A-frame, and everybody's probably heard of that and kind of has a sense of what that is. And then, but there's lots of other different configurations that you can kind of come up with when you're out there. And so we're just going to kind of talk about a few of them. So let's get into it. So the different type of tarp materials that you're likely to find out there. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but I think it's a good list to kind of, you know, be aware of, and you'd be able to kind of compare and have a decent understanding of, you know, the pros and the cons of some of these. And so the list that we're going to go over is the Sil Nylon, the Cuban Fiber, the poly or the polyethylene, Tyvek, canvas, or vinyl. So I'm going to briefly kind of just touch on these and kind of some of the distinctions between them. And so the Sil Nylon stands for silicone nylon. And so there's this nylon weave that goes on, and then it's kind of this silicone adhesive is placed on either side of that weave, and then it allows it to kind of add to its durability and its waterproofness. But this Sil Nylon is kind of one of the most popular outdoor types of tarps. And so for making tarp structures, this is a very common type. Very waterproof, very lightweight. And so because of those two features, it makes sense that it would be very popular. Not super breathable, and stretches when it's wet. And so those are kind of some of the cons. But sometimes you don't want it to be breathable, but generally, you know, it can be nice to have a little breathability, but especially if you don't want any, wind coming through or heat escaping, it can be good in that way as well. Yeah, and so the Cuban fiber is slightly lighter than the Sil Nylon, but it's also more costly. It does not stretch when it's wet, so that's also a good thing I would say. And then but it also is prone to abrasion, and so a little bit more, kind of being lighter weight makes sense that it's a little bit more likely to kind of get hurt, and it's easier to damage it. So you got to be a little bit more careful with it, possibly, than the Sil Nylon type. So the poly, short for polyethylene, is, I think, the most common type of tarp that we see out there. It's the, whenever you see the basic blue tarp, that's the polyethylene tarps. It's very cheap and does not stretch when it's wet either. These are a little bit heavier and will take up a little bit more space in your pack or whatever you're carrying, but are very waterproof and reasonably durable. And so for that reason, I think, especially if you're just getting into the outdoors and wanting to, try to start to make tarp structures, I think this is a great option. And this is the type of tarp that we use in the video. It's not blue, but it's the same polyethylene, type of material. So something that I did not know and learned when researching this, that Tyvek is great for tarp building, and a lot of people do it. It's super cheap. Tyvek is the same stuff that you put on the outside of your house when you're putting up siding. So you'll have your walls on the outside of the house, then you put Tyvek, and then you'll put up your siding. But it also can be great for tarp structures. There are several different versions of the Tyvek material, but the home wrap is the one that I think is used the most often. And again, that's the kind that's used to wrap around the house. It's super lightweight, breathable, and cheap. And it's going to take up slightly more space. It's kind of than your Sil Nylon and your Cuban fiber, but less space, I think, than your standard polyethylene tarps. One con is that they're not as pretty, but also I think that's kind of like a unique feature, and maybe you want that because people are like, whoa, why you have this cool thing, cool use for your Tyvek. And then also something interesting about them is that they're kind of, when you first buy Tyvek, it's very loud, and that can be annoying, possibly. Maybe you don't like that. But if you toss it into the wash for 1 or 2 cycles, it really softens it and makes it a lot quieter. But it also keeps its water resistance and waterproof quality to it after that. And so then we move on to the much more durable, heavy duty types of materials. And so canvas is going to be, not as packable and much heavier. So you're not going to want to probably do lightweight backpacking with this material as your tarp structure, but very waterproof, not breathable, but fire resistant. And so if you want to have something that's maybe a little closer to your campfire, if you're camping, something meant for car camping is kind of really ideal, and is also going to be a little bit more expensive, just because it's durable, heavy duty, beefy, if you will. And then finally, vinyl is very similar to the canvas in the sense of its durability and waterproofness, but it's going to be a little bit cheaper than the canvas actually, but more expensive than your blue tarp or your Tyveks. And yeah, just generally durable, and not the same type of fire resistance or fire retardant, but probably could get away with having it near the campfire for certain smaller campfires. Yeah, so that's generally the material stuff, and we're going to move on to density thickness. And so density thickness basically tells you, how heavy it is, how packable it is, and how durable it is. And so you can look at, whenever you're looking at a material, if they give you the specs, these are kind of some of the things that you might see that I have listed here. And so denier is basically kind of the weight of the individual threads that are used for that material. And so over here on the right, you can kind of see 1 denier all the way up to 600 on this little graph. And underneath there, you can kind of see some of the things that might be made with the different size denier thread. So you have all the way from 1 denier, which is or a little less, which it might be silk, or something much higher like the vinyl banner, which can be up to 1,000 denier. And so much more durable, much more tough materials are made up of thread that have a higher denier. And so if you're like looking for a really tough jacket or a tough tarp, you want something that has a thicker denier, which is again is going to make it heavier, less packable, whatnot. So then we can go on to mill thickness. And so this is basically just like how thick the tarp is. And here's a low quality res picture of several different tarps. Something that at one point was a standard was the color of the tarp would tell you the thickness of it. No longer is that the case. You can determine the thickness of the tarp by its color, but at one point that was the case. And there are several companies that still do that, but you can see here this green one is thicker than the white one, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, you can see just the thickness, and the mill thickness is telling you how thick it is in 1/1000th of an inch. So if you have 5 mil thickness, it's 5,000th of an inch, and so on and so forth. Ounces per square yard, that's just kind of basically telling you your weight per square yard. It's pretty straightforward. Weave count is how many threads, if it's made of a thread or nylon, per square inch. And so again, all of these things are going to tell you kind of how tough, how durable it is relative to other ones that you might be looking at. And so finally, types, construction. And so the things that I want to briefly mention and talk about around construction are the shape of the tarp, the built-in ridge lines, eyelets or grommets, and then the hem. And so here I'm talking about the shape. And generally the generic tarp structure is going to be a flat tarp, which basically is going to have corners with 90 degrees, 4 corners with 90 degrees with completely straight edges. And that's known as a flat tarp. And if you have a shaped tarp, it's going to have any number of corners, at least 3. And a lot of times those edges then will be curved. And having, these types of curved edges actually allows you to reduce the material and makes it lighter weight and more packable. And so, I think if you're just starting out trying to learn how to build tarp structures, is great to start with this flat tarp. And if you then get a little bit more experience and want to start to do some maybe light backpacking, these other shaped tarps are great options. So the built-in ridge line basically allows you to not have to create a ridge line in your tarp. And so you can see here in the bottom left corner, there's a built-in ridge line that goes from one of the eyelet points to the other. And so you didn't have to put a piece of rope or build your own ridge line that goes there. It's already there. And there's just some sort of webbing or rope that basically is sewn in or connected into the tarp itself. And so over here on the right, we have a diagram of a bunch of different kind of variations on shapes. And then these dotted lines on the far right column show you where the built-in ridge line is. And then they show you different views of like kind of what you would assume the configuration or likely configuration is for that type of tarp. And how that ridge line would then kind of work with that. All right, and so the next is the eyelets and the grommets. And so these are, in the top right corner, we can see a standard blue tarp, and you can see there's a number of grommets on each edge of the tarp. And this is where you're able to funnel the rope through possibly and tie off to. And so the number of eyelets or grommets per, foot or, the distance apart basically allows you to connect to your tarp at more locations, which allows you to increase your versatility or the number of configurations you might make with your tarp, but also to add to the strength. And so if you can connect to multiple places on the tarp, it allows you to, build stronger structures. And now these grommets are gonna come in lots of different shapes and sizes, as kind of shown here in all of these different images, but also be made of different materials. And so if you have one that's, you know, steel versus plastic, you know, the steel ones are going to be more durable. And then additionally, just to point out, some of these eyelets might not be grommets, but they also could be D-rings. And so here in the bottom left corner, we see a tarp structure or tarp material that have D-rings connected by what is basically kind of like a belt-like material or seat belt material that is funneled through, looped through the D-ring and then sewn into the tarp material. This looks like a canvas tarp. And so you might have not grommets, but these D-rings, and some tarps don't have any of those. And so that would be, you know, a good place to try to utilize that clove hitch to connect to your tarp. But otherwise, it's great to use these D-rings or the grommets to connect your ropes to your tarps. And then finally, the hem. So the hem, there's different ways, types of hemming that you might have. There's webbed hemming, but then there's also heat sealed hemming, or just kind of like a multi-stitch hemming. And then also you might have hem that's reinforced by, again, the webbing or by a rope. And some hemming isn't reinforced at all. And so when you have these reinforced hemming sections, it's going to be add to the durability, but again, also the weight and packability will go down. So you just want to kind of continually understand what your tarp's made of and what to do, like what you can do with it. And here's the nice little diagram that kind of just shows you all the parts of kind of a basic blue tarp with the eyelets, the hemming, and the different material that it's made of. Yeah, and so then next section is tarp size. Just briefly mention that, you know, tarps come in all different types of sizes. Make sure you're kind of aware of the size of your tarp and, you know, what you might be able to use it for. So if you have a really small tarp, and that might be good for going backpacking by your solo backpacking or something like that, but you're definitely going to want a bigger tarp if you're going with multiple people, and you know, if you're wanting to even have a party, you're going to have a really big tarp if you want to have 10, 20 people under a tarp, right? So really consider, you know, what you're wanting to do with your tarp when you're picking out the size. Okay, and so finally, configuration. So here's just a couple pictures of a ton of different configurations. Both of them at the top left corner of these little pictures have the A-frame. So here's the A-frame over here. Here's the A-frame over here. That's the classic tarp structure. It's great if that's available to you, but depending on where you are when you're out in nature, you're not going to always have that available to you. So it's good to have an idea in a sense that you can do other structures, and also what you want to get out of your tarp structure might inform you on what type of configuration you want to make. And so if it's super, super windy, you might want to try to do this windshield wedge down at the bottom right of this picture on the right. So that wind shed wedge one would be great to protect you from the wind if the wind's coming from the one, you know, the direction behind the tarp. And there are other kind of similar configurations for stuff like that. So yeah, just kind of consider, you know, that there are a lot of options, and also, you know, whether you're coming into a space and the trees allow you, whatever the trees allow you to kind of make is what you're going to end up doing most likely. But you got to use what's around you. And so again, you can use logs and large rocks to also help, you know, weigh your structure down or tie off to. And so yeah, just use whatever's available to you. All right, so then now we're going to have a short video of us kind of demonstrating some of the things that we've just discussed and actually making a tarp structure out in at Powell Butte in Portland, Oregon.
Now that you guys know all about knots and tarps, we're gonna get to see one get set up. So the first step is to check out your area and try to find a good spot. This is the area we found here. We got 2 trees across from each other and a good amount of other trees that we can use to like tie off our corners to. One thing to look out for when you're setting up a tarp is to make sure that there's no like trees that Hey Carl, there's no sound right now on the video because you muted your volume. Yeah. Some wedding, but I don't think that will be as helpful for setting up a tarp. And then one of these just like plastic tarps with some plastic reinforced like grommets on the side. If you don't have these on it, there's other ways that we can set it up too, so it's not a big deal. Like Carl said, there's a bunch of different tarp options and ways of doing it. So we'll get started. This is our ridge line. We set it up between these two trees. You want them to be like, make sure the tree isn't bending when you pull on it, basically. But it could be like 6 inches is usually what you use for climbing. It can be a little less than that because it's not going to be like holding up your body weight. But there's a good amount of tension on this rope, so the trees are holding strong enough for that. I did a Builtin knot here on this one end, and I did this first. And then I took the ridge line over to this tree here. And here I tied a trucker's hitch, so you can see like my little loop and the hitch here. And what I did is I put it around the tree and pulled it through, and here I tied a slip knot. To do that, it's kind of tricky. You gotta like pinch the string to hold the tension there, and then do that slip knot right there and push it against it. And that'll hold your tension. If you don't want to do that, you can also just like wrap it around the tree if you have enough extra string. I was running a little short, so I left it there. Yeah, and so this is my ridge line. I think one thing to note, we did like a little bit of an angle. You could do it flat too. The more angled it is, the lower down it will be on one side. So if it's like super rainy, that might be helpful for like getting the rain or snow to like run off of your tarp and not start seeping through if you're out in the elements for a while. Yeah. All right, so we've got our tarp all set up here. The way we did that is just putting it over our ridge line. And one more thing about the ridge line is like if you put it up higher, it'll be like better for a shade structure. If you have a really big tarp, you could do it. You could stand under it. That's kind of nice. If you're using the tarp to like keep snow or rain from falling on you, having it lower will be more helpful because it'll block more of the wind and just keep it closer into you. So the way we did this is that we put had a knot in the end of the P cord and did a little girth hitch here. So it just like threads through there and through that. And then one other thing is we try to get it at like a 45-degree angle. That's gonna like create the best tarp structure, but that's not always how trees grow, so we make do with what we got. So this is the top line that we did on this corner, so up and down the tree. I did some girth hitches to extend the P cord because we needed it to go out a little longer. And the cool thing about this one is you can loosen it and tighten it just by sliding the hitch along the cord here. So that's how we got it nice and tight and helps hold it firm. I think that's all.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us on that, and hopefully have fun making some really awesome tarp structures out there.
Yeah, thanks all. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.